That is not my story.
What is your story?
I never let myself be alone long enough to think about it.
Happy New Year, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now the AMCU, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to all of our listeners, some of which got real vocal after last epised.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about Civil War. So, you're going to have the people who choose the sides, and you picked the right one sometimes, and you picked the wrong one sometimes, and I picked the right one sometimes, I picked the wrong one sometimes. It might have been one of the more vocal episodes that we've had in our history of the show. I just want to bring up a couple of them that came to me. You don't know about any of this.
Oh, no.
This is a little bit of a surprise to you.
Okay. I'm scared.
Well,
should I be?
I'm not going to say you shouldn't be.
I will say before you even read them, I do not regret anything that I said on the show.
You're not the one that they're coming after.
Okay.
In that case,
so bring it on.
Yeah. So on Instagram, you can always hit me up, B_Ward028 at Instagram. On Instagram, I got a DM from someone inviting me. I'm not going to tell you who their name is because I just don't want to give them that kind of attention. But they invited me to come check out their militia. And said that if I had a problem with them fighting for their freedoms.
Oh, no.
Then without signing an accord, then maybe I should just try to come stop them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, is that reportable? That sounds a little threatening.
Well, I mean, I guess it's only reportable if I decide to actually go and, check them out. But
did you respond?
No, I did not respond. As someone else, actually, much more reasonably, this one, Marco over at Twitter said, wow, B, with the bad takes on the Civil War episode, just because it's a law doesn't mean it's right or should be upheld. And he's not wrong.
Yeah.
He is 100% not wrong. But when I think of laws that are unjust and should not be upheld, I think of like maybe the most egregious that I can think of off the top of my head is like the National Housing Act of 1934, which we're still dealing with today. I'm thinking of the Fugitive Slave Act in the just before the Civil War in the 1850s. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of like the Indian Removal Act shortly before that. I'm thinking of the Fugitive Slave Act in the late 1700s. These are the laws that I think should absolutely not be upheld and are unjust and immoral laws.
Sure. And on and on, in the Jim Crow era and other times where a law did not necessarily equate to moral right.
Right.
And in fact, many laws were in clear violation of civil rights. And I think where you and I probably could agree on is that whereas the Civil War comics made it very clear that these were that the real conflict was an argument about the law itself, the Registration Act itself violating human rights and dignities. In the film,
It doesn't.
It doesn't really follow that structure. It shifts a little bit to make it a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and you even named it last time. You said in the comics you were instantly thrown in prison for not signing it. Mm-hmm. Here, you're not. You're given the opportunity to simply walk away. You're given the opportunity to retire. And when I called out Cap, which I realized being the Superman of the Marvel universe, the character who is so pure and has no flaws. I'm sorry, in the movies, he is showing his flaws. He is showing that because he is disillusioned, he cannot trust any government. We're not talking about a single government who decided to write up these accords. Mm-hmm. This was signed by many countries around the world. Everyone agreed that this, and now I'm going to say it, militia, the Avengers, needed to be checked. There needed to be checks and balances. There needs to be some sort of account for what they are doing. There needs to be some sort of regulation for what they are doing. They cannot simply get together as a group and decide they are on the moral right and go attack somebody. They can't do it.
In particular, here where you have a group of people who are physically more powerful, and in other ways of entitlement and resources, but also physically in a superhuman way, more powerful. That
they have the ability to level buildings with their bare hands.
So these safeguards would protect the human lives, especially those who are under-resourced and in this case less powerful than superheroes, which I think could be argued for. And again, I think we also agreed that the flaw of the film was that it turned the corner to become a personal vendetta because of a particular individual, Bucky.
Right.
And
on two different sides.
Yeah, and I don't mind that because then the film becomes the story of a deteriorating and fragmented morality. It becomes Cap losing himself, being torn apart, and essentially maybe even showing us what could happen if all the right parameters are there to somebody who normally, under different circumstances, can hold a pretty strong moral compass.
Yeah, there's nothing that you could say that would make me agree with the level of ferocity with which he is pounding on Tony by the end of that movie. And that's, you're right, he is losing his way. So for you to not choose Cap in this moment is totally acceptable to me. Like, would I necessarily choose Tony in any other circumstance? I don't know. There's a gray area there. But in the way that this movie was treated, and by the way, when I say broke laws, I'm not saying like he simply signed the accord and like 2 months later found out his friend from the 1930s was in jeopardy. The moment the accords were signed, he instantly turned against everyone and broke the law. And I mean, this was I don't even know how to, I don't know how to win over someone who is just so hell-bent on Team Cap that they believe that he did no wrong in this movie. I think, and they did say choose a side, and there are people who chose a side. So, Marco, I think you're absolutely right. Just because it's a law, and I did say he broke the law, he should be. These are all people who broke laws. They should be put in prison. I don't think this is an unjust law. I don't think this is, like you said, you've got the ability to, with your bare hands, level a building. You know what happens when you don't put checks and balances on a militia group? Ultron happens. They had no accountability, and I know you can say that like Cap had nothing to do with Ultron. He didn't know Tony was building him. He didn't know any of this was happening. Not the point. The point is the group as a whole was basically funded by Tony, and and was just sort of working on their own. They all believed that they were right and that this is what they needed to do to protect humanity. And whether right or wrong, really bad stuff happened. Thousands of people were killed in the process, and the one person who refused to bow to the government in the very beginning of this entire franchise of films, Tony, has now come to the conclusion that he can't necessarily be left unchecked, and that maybe we do need accountability. And if this had been the comics, I would have been Team Cap. But because it was not, and because it was such a personal vendetta, it was just him deciding to protect an old friend who's a mass murderer, and Tony wanting to kill this mass murderer for having killed his own parents. Because it became so personal. I think it is a very flawed movie. I think it's a very flawed take on Civil War.
And I agree with what you're saying, but here's where I disagree. I still think it's a good movie in that it gives us the lesson of what happens. Exactly what you said, when we lose our way and it becomes personal, and you lose that fundamental grounding and connection to the set of principles and values that guide you. You kind of get biased and blinded. Yes, there are actual laws currently in place, laws and accords and various requirements and mandates that are unjust, and that we should battle. We should absolutely challenge.
Yeah.
But I think it's about the why. So how are you feeling then about the person, Black Widow, who illegally let these fugitives go, assisted their criminal activity,
signed the accords, and then
yes,
and then
because this film is all about her and what happens next.
Yeah, we're covering Black Widow, where we learn that we can't choose our family, but you know who can? The Russian government. The Russian government can put families together. Let's talk about Black Widow, which we're jumping ahead, obviously, in the release order of the films, because this one takes place right after Civil War. Let's talk about Black Widow. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Black Widow. It was a great James Bond movie. I think that there's probably a lot that you are coming at this movie with, because there's a lot of there's clearly a whole lot of trauma, and it's clearly affecting the children more than it's affecting the adults. Although I kind of want to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's important. But tell me, as you were watching the film, this is only the second time we've seen it. We saw it when it came out in theaters. But then we decided to watch it again last night.
And rewatching it right after watching the Civil War, or within days of watching Captain America Civil War, was really it just felt connected and intuitive. It just worked really well, at least for me, because you had the fragmentation, you had the break in the group, this huge divorce, the chasm that was created, and then you follow this individual and you learn about her history. I think that it works really well, and I would even say that watching it again had a bigger impact on me. I think watching it for the first time, it didn't really connect. There was a lot going on, and I just felt like there was so much action that you couldn't quite...
It's a very noisy movie.
Yeah, you can't quite connect with the relationship stuff.
And let's be honest, when people were seeing it for the first time, they were carrying with them the baggage of knowing that she was dead in the
Yes.
and how she died
Yeah.
in Endgame, and I think that people were desperately wanting and expecting this movie to correct that in some way, to somehow make amends for the way that she died in the franchise. Spoiler alert. And I don't think it's fair to look at this movie as being responsible for doing that. I like you, this many months, a year and change or whatever, couple of years from Endgame now, looking at this movie in the context of chronological order right after Civil War, I think makes a ton of sense.
I think it works. I think
Yeah.
it works really well.
Yeah.
I think too, what makes this movie really strong are the lead characters, the two sisters who have this history together, and we'll talk about how they grew up and the characteristics and nature of the adversity of their upbringing in their childhood, and this family, but in particular this maternal figure, this other woman who is a caregiver for them, Melina, played by Rachel Weisz. So seeing it again, I think those are very strong performances, and I think it's just uplifting in a way to see their grit and to kind of see how they relate to each other, despite the uniqueness and the very real flaws within their relationship. This is not meant to be a family. This is a parody of a family. This is a spy family. This is a very unique situation full of trauma. And yet the three of them differently are able to create a sense of comfort, a sense of relational health, a sense of survival that works for them.
I mean, it's interesting that and I think you're right, but I do think that it's interesting that you're ignoring
What's his nuts?
David Harbour
I'm not ignoring
in
him.
this because, and the reason I say that is, for starters, I'm intrigued. I'm so intrigued by the direction of this character and David Harbour's performance, because when we are first introduced to him, he seems like a regular guy. He seems a little on the dour side because he's just basically found out that they've got to flee. They've got about an hour before the government, the American government, catches up to what they've done. But he's very serious. And for the rest of the movie, he's a bumbling idiot. And Black Widow even calls him out on it. She even says, "You're an idiot."
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he's an excellent actor, because that whole bit in the beginning, I bought him as being a very competent human being, a very competent soldier, a very competent father, a very competent, because everything that he would say to them was comforting to them.
So are you saying that wasn't real?
I don't know. There's so much time that goes by, and we get so little information about what any of them were doing.
Right.
We know that in his case, at some point in time, he and Dreykov had a falling out, and Dreykov had him imprisoned for the rest of his life, presumably for speaking ill of the Russian government. And the way that it was, the direction in which it was being run. And so Dreykov had him imprisoned. We don't know at what point that was. We don't know how long he's been in prison. We just know that you took Russia's only super soldier and put him into a regular prison, I guess expecting him to not break out. But maybe while he was in prison, that's when he decided to go off his rocker a little bit, because for the rest of the movie, David Harbour's character of Red Guardian is primarily comic relief. Do you agree?
I know I do agree with you. It's actually really interesting that we in the audience also kind of get wrapped up in the question of what is real and what isn't real, because that becomes the nature of the girls, their emotional state, their emotional characteristics, and we should talk about this. They have very different reactions, very different ways to deal with the trauma.
I do want to talk about it. Natasha is older than Yelena. Very much looks at Yelena as a little sister, someone who needs to be protected. The closest thing she's ever had to a real family. And the difference is Yelena doesn't really seem to acknowledge
She's
the
too
Red
young.
Room. She's too young.
Right.
You kind of question where she even came from to begin with.
I actually don't even think Yelena ever, because they had been a family for 3 years, family in quotes, meaning they had this forced family where Yelena, being maybe 2 or 3,
wouldn't have had any,
would not know anything about the Red Room,
totally,
and would see this as her real family.
Yes.
Now Natasha was old enough to already experience the indoctrination and some of the abuses of the Red Room.
Younger than young Yelena.
Yeah,
is,
younger than
like,
6, which is how old Yelena is in the film.
Right.
In the start of the film.
But what I mean is, it's interesting because if you've got a child that's 2 or 3 years old, like this is someone who has just basically been given to a family as like a 2-year-old, as like an adopted 2-year-old, and has now formed memories of that family as being her family. Whereas Natasha knows exactly what's coming when they're found out.
And while, again, because this is the parents are involved in espionage and are willingly involved in this operation. This is certainly not the same as some of the systems we know about. The child welfare system, the mental health and juvenile justice system, where you see young children placed in different facilities, in different homes with different families, different units, family units. And you see a similar pattern where younger children may not have the same awareness, may not have the same perceptions or the discernment that the older children have, because the older children may have been quite literally old enough to experience the adversity in a certain way. And, I have to mention that, and we've talked about childhood adversity before on the show.
Yeah, you have said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have said that children of a certain age will process and will get through things easier if you don't keep reminding them that they've been traumatized, or if they haven't been. Well, and what I mean by that is you have said, for instance, some of the questions around the treatment of children who have been involved in school shootings. And you've said we need to be very careful about how we go into those schools with psychologists, because if a psychologist goes to a certain child who didn't necessarily view it as trauma, but is then told you were traumatized, that child might then become traumatized. Whereas some children at a certain age just process it and get through it.
And the age factor is really significant. And a lot of this work comes from Dr. Bruce Perry, who for the last 30 plus years has looked into the impact of childhood adversity and childhood abuse, reminding us, a lot of this work reminds us that the first few months of a child's life are so critical, to the degree that you could even compare children who have experienced adversity, let's say in the first 6 months, compared to children who experience adversity many, many years later. And you'd see that those children who had early life experiences that were comforting, secure attachments that, were not characterized as abusive, that their outcomes are better. And the reason I'm saying this is that you look at Yelena and Natasha and you realize, even though the both of them are about to have years and years of adversity in the form of this, KGB red room abuse, exploitation, physical, mental, emotional abuse, and so forth. It was Yelena who had the first few months, I'm assuming now we know the first few years of a secure attachment by caregivers and a sibling who showed love and comfort and security emotionally to her.
Yeah.
And you see her kind of, when we see her as an adult, she is, and by the way, who plays Yelena? Who's the actor?
Oh, Florence Pugh.
Amazing. Such a delight to watch. She's so quick-witted and so good. She actually has a much healthier response psychologically to the current events. She's able to find the good and the what I would call the positive relational attachments to her so-called parents.
So,
and Natasha,
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
though.
no, Natasha, because she was, and I'm assuming because she didn't have a secure attachment in her first few years, she didn't get that until when she formed this family, maybe late adolescence.
Yeah,
right?
and only 3 years of this family.
Yeah.
She was basically in a foster relationship for 3 years and was cognizant of it. She knew that these weren't her parents.
So, and again, and I'm glad you say that, because it's not to say that we're saying foster care and adoption isn't, it won't be resourceful and healthy and have good results and outcomes.
If the foster relationship is healthy.
Right. It's really about pointing out the importance and the critical nature of the first few months and the first few years, in that you could even say that that's much more important than what comes later in life, in teenagehood and in adulthood. And you even see that in the difference between the loving nature, the emotional capacity, the emotional intelligence of the two girls. Is Natasha emotionally intelligent? For sure. She's exceptional. I mean, in the Avengers, she's very, very caring, and she has a lot of discernment. But it is Yelena who's able to kind of form bonds, and who seems, in my mind, to have such a wealth of emotional capacity. And that, to me, seems like it stemmed from this early childhood experience of comfort and security and attachment.
Right. And because in this movie, we find out that Natasha was taken as a baby. Like she was bought. She was purchased from her parents.
She really, from childhood, was pretty much abused.
Yeah.
And I think, if you can maybe play I know we're jumping ahead, but if you can play some of the dialogue, some of the conversation from the dinner table, which is, I can say as a psychologist watching the dynamic between all the family members, such a study. You see all the different reactions they have. And at one point, the conversation breaks down a little.
Yeah.
And it's Yelena who says that that the family, even if it
that
isn't
was
a
real.
blood family, it was real to her.
Yeah, hold on. All right, here we go. I've got it.
Our family was never real, so there's nothing to hold on to. We're moving on.
Never family. In my heart, I am simple man. And I think that for a couple deep undercover Russian agents, I think we did pretty great as parents, huh?
Yes, we had our orders and we played our roles to perfection.
Who cares? That wasn't real.
What?
That wasn't real. Who cares?
Don't say that. Please don't say that. It was real. It was real to me. You are my mother. You were my real mother. The closest thing I ever had to one. The best part of my life was fake. And none of you told me. And those agents you chemically subjugated around the globe, that was me.
I want to skip ahead just a little bit to a little piece of audio that I have as well, because I think it directly connects to this. This is an additional conversation that takes place just a few minutes later, after Yelena has removed a bottle of vodka from the table and has taken it into her bedroom because she wants to be alone.
Yeah.
And the Red Guardian shows up to try to comfort her and tells her this outrageous story about ice fishing. And I just want to get your take here at the very end of this. This scene is sort of split up with another scene that is also between Natasha and Melina. So I don't have the whole thing, but this is the tail end of the conversation.
So there I am, ice fishing with my father. It's a very cold day in this little ice shed, cold even for Russia. Keep the vodka by the fire, my father would say to me.
Please stop talking.
Please wait,
no,
please
please, I
wait,
don't want to
please, please. There is a reason why I'm telling you this, okay? Trust me. I am reaching for fish. Oh, I lose balance. Splash! My hands go in the river. In this weather, frostbite sets in quick. My father, he go toilet on my hands.
Oh my God.
Urine is
Oh my
35 degrees Celsius. Staves off the frostbite.
How is this relevant?
Fathers.
So he's using this as an opportunity to connect. He's like, look, fathers, this is what fathers like. I'm a father. He's still trying to make this connection to her, because I think that he has. I think that he did love the girls, just in a very different way for those 3 years.
And I don't think and again, we're getting stuck in, rightfully so. And I think, again, this is the strength of the movie, is throughout the movie is a thread of, what is real? Who can you trust? Can you even trust yourself? There's this, of course, with the brainwashing and the exploitation of women, there's the deeper theme that I think can be said of almost everything in this film, which is all about a sense of real, authentic care. Is it fake? Is it real? Am I exploited? Am I not exploited?
Yeah.
Do I actually care for this person? Does this person actually care for me? And I appreciate that it asks us, it almost forces us to really kind of explore those questions. Mm-hmm. And I think with the family dynamic, what you bring up is really, really a part of that. It was real to him too, is what he's saying. Some level of fatherhood, some aspects of being a caregiver for this young child was real for him. Mm-hmm. And he's doing his best to kind of bond with her and relate to her in that way.
Yeah.
But Yelena, and I'd say him as well, psychology backs them up. Blood relationship is really not what makes a family member or a parent, right? And there's a tremendous amount of psychological science that shows that it is the community, it is the connectedness that we have, the true authentic, kind of going back to the real, the authentic relationships that we have. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Perry even says that it is the connectedness, these families, these bonds, these cultures that actually can overcome adversity, that you don't need therapy, you don't need interventions, you don't need a medical expert, that what you need is a community. You need a loving, caring, you need the people around you, mm-hmm. whether they're your parent or not, to give you that love and security. And that's what these children got.
On the flip side, Dreykov, played by Ray Winstone, again, a wonderful Bond villain. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. He looks at these girls as weapons, as tools, so that he can basically rule the world one day, and that all of that's about to come to fruition. here at the climax of the movie. But he also says that he has made genuine connections with them, or at least with some of them. He believes that he's got a genuine connection with Natasha. He is particularly hurt when she abandons him to become an Avenger, and when she tries to kill him in order to become an Avenger. But there's a moment toward the end of the movie that I was particularly taken by, and it's a moment when he is talking to who we, the audience, believe is Melina, and he says something to the effect of, when you've raised someone, you can recognize their eyes. You look them in the eyes and you can recognize their eyes. And that's how he is informing the audience that he is not tricked by this ruse. And he pulls the mask off of Melina to reveal Natasha, which really does tell us, for better or for worse, he knows Natasha so well that he can instantly tell you are not who you are claiming to be. He's not just someone who is collecting young girls and turning them into weapons. And I wouldn't say that it's sweet. I wouldn't say that it's I wouldn't say that's a loving thing, but he does have this connection to her that's a bit shocking in that moment.
But it's the connection of equivalent to a person and the thing that they own. It's more of a possession. It's more of an ownership.
Yeah.
It is, again, somebody exploiting these women and therefore clinging to them as if they were, and to him they are, weapons, tools, things that he owns.
And in the same way that you might have your favorite knife or your favorite gun or your favorite sword, Natasha was a favorite of his. He knows her inside and out. Yeah, because when I heard it, I mean, I obviously didn't think it was a good thing.
Yeah.
But it was a little bit of a shock to me to be like, oh, this isn't going to be easy for you to trick him, because he knows her eyes so well.
And this is the nature of an abusive and exploitative relationship. And you pick up on these dynamics that I think are intended, right? That he is, when he speaks to her, it is uncomfortable. His face is right next to her face. He is speaking into her ear, like half an inch from her ear. He is breathing on her. He's
putting the palm of his hand on the top of her head.
He is incredibly intimidating.
Yeah.
And the physicality of it is, it's uncomfortable, but it's also pretty gross. There's I think, again, there's an intended power dynamic, gender dynamic, and abusive dynamic that is not light. It's not light. I think it's pretty heavy.
Were you getting like Harvey Weinstein vibes off of this, where it's a man who clearly, because I don't think it's a secret that I don't think that it's a coincidence that he has created this sort of fail-safe mechanism by creating this pheromone thing, this lock, so that you can't harm him.
Yeah.
He knows he is protected. It's really easy to be a bully, and it's really easy to be this intimidating when you know for a fact it's impossible for the other person to do any harm to you. You know, it makes you wonder if he would be the same way if these weapons he has created, if he thought there was ever a chance they might turn against him the way Natasha did. In fact, we find out that it's because Natasha left and turned against him that he is using these other methods to control the girls, to make sure that he never, no one ever leaves again. But yeah, we find out that there's some sort of pheromone, so that if you're sensing it, you can't attack him. And it makes you think about the non-fictional power dynamics where you
cannot
someone like
resist.
Weinstein knows you can't hurt him.
You do not have the choice to resist.
Yeah.
You have to comply. In fact, I think that there were different mentions and articles making those comparisons. And in my mind, this is not so much depicting a single person. I think it's, for me, meant to depict the power dynamic that exists in the industry and similar industries, where similar to a pheromone lock or a brainwashing type of technology, there are dynamics within those relationships where there is simply no choice but to comply and to seemingly agree to there is no consent.
Mm-hmm.
There's no option for consent, but there is the forced agreement to comply because what is the other option?
Yeah.
In this case, more abuse, physical abuse, injury, death, harm. So
A surgical removal of your brain to determine why you were not.
Which they did to many women. So
Well, no, that they were going to do to Yelena. He wanted to know how she was able to get everything. I guess how she was able to resist the power he had over her, and so he was like, go take her brain out, examine it, study it. I want to know.
And I think too, there is a Me Too theme throughout the film, because I think it's toward the beginning when the Black Widows discover, especially Yelena, she discovers that her counterparts have been brainwashed through this chemical agent, and that there's essentially this antidote, these vials of chemical formulas that can undo the brainwash state. And she is essentially a huge conceit in the first part of the film, is that she's trying to convince Natasha that that's happened. And there's a point in the movie where she says, "Do you believe me now?"
Yeah.
And I believe that's a statement that's bigger than what's happening in the movie.
Yeah.
I think that statement is, I keep telling you that this abuse is happening. I keep telling you and trying to express that these experiences are real and they're real for me, but you are not hearing me. So what kind of evidence do you need me to show you for you to finally see these harms, these invisible harms that are being done? I think that's a very powerful part of the script there. And I also think that it speaks to a lot of things that are a part of the film and also outside of the film that are happening.
Sure. Could I just say, we've been talking about her throughout the podcast, and I'm sort of glad that we've spent this much time talking about her. Yelena is legit my favorite character in the MCU right now. She is, like you said, a joy to watch. She is insanely competent at her job, and yet funny. I don't want to say too much about the first season of Hawkeye, but you may get a chance to like see her again after this movie. And if you haven't seen Hawkeye, I highly recommend it. She is a light for me in this franchise, because so many characters at this point are taking these real dark turns, and I think you and I we're explaining why these characters are hitting these dark moments in their lives and these dark moments in their thoughts and what comes of them. But Yelena is just a perfectly balanced character for me. And I would be okay if we just got a Yelena
like a film just devoted to her.
Or a series. it would be tricky. You'd have to, because she is sort of, it's so well balanced. I think maybe because she's not having to be the lead of something, but if you get the right writers in there, they might be able to pull something off. I just enjoy her very much. So I'm glad that we've been talking about her this much.
Well, and so I've said, and I'm not discounting or dismissing David Harbour's role, but I do think that there's something very special about this film coming away, again, being the next film following Civil War, which is, at the end of the film, these guys just punching each other and really trying to destroy one another. This is an interesting kind of counterpart. This is I'm in no way saying that this is a feminist movie or that this is about feminism, but I'm saying that there is so much discord and separation and kind of breaking apart. That's sort of the rupture. Civil War is about rupture. This film is primarily about coming together despite the fragments, despite the obvious things about this family that are flawed.
Even the right hand figure of the villain, Taskmaster, is eventually defeated not from lots of punching to the face, but through compassion and empathy and love and using the little red gas on her. This is an opportunity where if this had been a Captain America movie or an Iron Man movie, this would have been all the punches, all the kicks, all the explosions. And there are a lot of punches and kicks and explosions in the climax of this movie. Don't get me wrong. It's a very loud movie, but what it all boils down to in the end is the compassion that Natasha has for Taskmaster, realizing that she's Dreykov's daughter, that in assassinating Dreykov, Natasha was using this little girl as a tool to get to him, and thought she had killed her too. And in fact, we first heard of this when Loki is using all of these past transgressions against Black Widow in the first Avengers movie when he's imprisoned, and he's like, do you remember Dreykov's daughter? And for a moment, she seems upset by this, but then it turns out to be a ruse. Here, she is genuinely upset by all the references to Dreykov's daughter. And we see the flashback. We get to see what this story is. We get to see that this is how she joined S.H.I.E.L.D. Which makes me wonder, though not too deeply, if S.H.I.E.L.D. was okay with her killing the little girl. Like I almost got the impression, and maybe this is just the wishful thinking in my head, and maybe I missed some dialogue or something, but I got the impression that only she knew she was using the little girl. Like S.H.I.E.L.D. just knew, is it okay? Do we blow it up now? Tell us if it's okay, we blow it up.
Right.
And she was like, great, I'm going to use the little girl because I know visually that if the little girl goes into daddy's office, that's when it's okay to blow it up.
She was willing to have that collateral.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that S.H.I.E.L.D. would have allowed that. And again, I kind of find that to work well in that this is about looking for the people that care about you and care for you. And Taskmaster, who literally has no name, didn't have that until this family of Black Widows, because at the end of the film, they welcome her into their community. Now, is it heavy-handed? There's a lot of, by the end of the movie, women holding hands and having each other's backs and, walking into the
and giving them
sunset.
each other's clothes. Like Yelena gives her
there's
the
a lot
vest,
of that,
gives her the vest that she ends up making famous in the first Avengers Infinity War, I guess. You've not really talked about at all is Melina. you've mentioned the three women and the three strong women and looking out for one another. Melina, the mother figure for these 3 years, is literally in the beginning teaching Yelena, who has fallen and hurt her knee, that the pain will make her stronger. So she's already setting up the psychology for getting through the Red Room later on in life. They didn't necessarily know it was going to happen today, but she's already putting these thoughts and these sort of mantras into her head. And it is interesting too, because the moment that Melina shows up to take care of Yelena, Natasha shuts down a little. Like, this is still a distrust of the mother figure, seeing through the actions of the mom and the words of the mom to know what it is she's doing. And when they come and find her later, she is still doing all of these morally questionable experiments on pigs to prove that they have removed free will from life. You know, she nearly kills a pig by simply instructing it to stop breathing, and it does. And doesn't bring it back. She's got that golden age of science sort of expression.
I really don't like that scene
where she's like, oh, it still had 11 seconds before it died.
I have a website that I check routinely, at least once a week.
You really do.
It's called doesthedogdie.com.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend it. It's a website that will tell you whether there are disturbing elements in particular films. And in fact, all you have to do is type in the name of the film, and it'll
bring up like 50 questions.
It'll bring up a list of elements.
Yeah.
And you can see it's binary, yes or no. Does this thing
color-coded
happen?
Green and red.
Right.
Yes, it
so
happens.
if you see
no, it
a bunch
doesn't
of
happen.
green, you're sort of feeling like, okay, there's not a lot of content here that's going to disturb me. The red will denote disturbing elements that I think are just handmade for me, because they happen to be the types of elements that bother me. Does an eye get gouged? Does a finger get pulled? You don't
like movies where fingers get pulled?
Well, or severed or whatever.
Okay.
Are there bugs? Does somebody fall out of a plane? Does a dog die? Does a dragon die?
Yeah.
So it has all of these different elements, disgusting, disturbing, sad, upsetting, triggering. It has all of that.
And surely the animal torture would have been involved.
Yeah, so animal torture is always listed, and had I checked the site, I would have known. But I knew it from the first time we saw the film, and I was really uncomfortable during.
But again, psychologically, she does this to this pig.
Yeah.
And you think, wow, that's really traumatic. But then you also think about how much the pigs are obeying her in the beginning. And you almost get a sense it's not just because she's got the little iPad there and she's controlling them to do everything. Some of them are genuinely affectionate toward her, not unlike Yelena.
Well, so I was going to say, do you think that in many ways she has been complicit?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, she has helped. She comes right out and says that the formula that has been used on these girls after Natasha left to make sure none of them had free will, basically, was developed by her. Mm-hmm. She's the one who did it, because Yelena even says, yeah, these girls that you subjugated, around the world, like I was one of them. And so
I would even go so far as to say that she facilitated the abuse. She perhaps participated in the recruitment of young women or young children.
Yes.
And she's the Maxwell Ghislaine.
Ghislaine.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had no idea. Yes. I do not think she's a good character. She is one of those characters that doesn't really seem to have the EQ so much as the IQ. Like, she's in it for the learning and she comes right out and says that in America, they weren't tasked with stealing weapons. They weren't tasked with stealing information. They were literally, and she says this with a smile on her face, they stole free will from people. Like, this is what she was into.
So putting her on trial would be an interesting concept, right? Was she manipulated and abused and exploited to the degree?
Yes.
That,
So this is what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you just said that. This is what I wanted to ask you, because in a conversation that she has with Natasha, and she explains that Natasha was acquired as a baby, her parents were paid off, and that her mother was ultimately killed because she was relentless. Melina says that she's been through the Red Room. She's been cycled through the Red Room her entire life. So this is what the Red Room has done to her. And we can look at her as complicit, and we can look at her as someone who is problematic. But at the same time, presumably she was also bought from her parents. Her parents could have also been killed. And from the time she was a baby, Melina was also indoctrinated into this system. And the way that she puts it, she was literally cycled through many times. So now, with that in mind, is she complicit? Is she a bad person? Is she someone who would be able to stand trial and be found guilty? Because it would be really easy to use her entire life's history as her defense, right?
I wonder too if because she has not only survived those harsh experiences, but seemed to even adjust to them and work with those environmental factors to kind of help her excel, help herself excel.
Yeah.
And we do see this in, a proportion, a very small proportion of interesting cases where you find just a tremendous amount of adversity in early experiences with an amazing outcome, like a survivorship that is actually successful, like above and beyond. And I think that our intuition is to say, well, this is a good outcome. What are the benefits of hardships and adversities? Isn't this what resilience is? And I'm careful with that because when we're surviving, we do what we need to do to make it through. It's life or death, right? And she had to make some choices to be able to live, like to get through these harsh experiences.
And it kind of makes you wonder if over the course of this movie, it's like you said, what can you believe and not believe? What is real? What is not?
But it also gives her survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is usually something that pertains to economics and technology and things like that, and social psychology. But in this case, it gives her the sense that if you just do the things that I did to get you through these hardships, you'll be exceptional.
Yeah, she asks like Natasha, how did you maintain your humanity? Yeah. Like, how were you able to, which makes you think that all the many cycles through the Red Room took Melina's humanity from her. That's why she's so ones and zeros and just all about the science. Like she gets excited over
Yeah.
those things, not over any kind of humanity. But when you say that she's willing to do anything she can to survive, is that also what she's doing at the end of the movie? Is she siding with the side she knows is going to end up winning?
It's really interesting.
Because she is ultimately a survivor, and that's what this is going to take. If her emotionality has sort of been removed from her, now, of course, we're meant to believe that she regains it, like she's brought back to understanding what humanity is. But remember, this girl has been cycled through the Red Room since she was a baby many, many, many times. She has never known what it was like to feel love. She was never known. It's like you said, and this is what I wanted to, the adults versus the kids. You bring up the fact that Yelena deals with it pretty well because she knew what love was for the first, for those formative 3 years. Natasha has never really known what love was, not real love, so she did not handle it well. Is Milena now handling it even worse and putting it all on because she too has never known, and she's a lot older than Natasha is now?
I mean, I would even say there could be some pathology there that makes her an excellent spy.
Right.
But a flawed and potentially dangerous person to be in a relationship with.
I would be curious to know if they plan on using her again in the future. And if they did, is she going to become a hero character, or is she going to remain a bit on that gray side and a bit shady? Because I think if you really wanted to boil down the character and really think about it the way that we're doing now, it opens up some really interesting possibilities.
Yeah. And remember what I had said about jobs and espionage, that what the scientists and the psychologists say are required, or at least necessary for being successful as a spy, include having very, very little compassion and empathy, like truly for other people, like kind of being cold-hearted.
Sociopaths.
Is right. Exactly. Having a willingness to engage in violence, knowing that other people may be injured or die as a result of it. So,
like Batman.
Kind of, yeah. So,
God, it's taken so long for you to get to this point.
Yeah, those components exist in Milena more than they do in Natasha.
But Milena's older and has gone through it.
Right.
She never broke away. So yeah, it's really interesting. Overall, I know you said that you enjoyed it more this second time. Is this a movie that you liked? Did you?
I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I think, and again, I think it's because there are some real, there are some important elements here that are backed by psychology. The ideas of early childhood adversity, the beginning scenes, I thought were really visceral. The scenes where the family gets noticed that they have to escape pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And though the tension of that escape is, just so well captured when you think about families in peril, communities who are persecuted, children who are in homes that are not secure, are not safe, and you find these different behaviors that you can kind of lock into in this film. So, for instance, when the younger child Yelena doesn't have shoes, and they're having to rush, grab just what you have on and run to the car.
And she grabs a My Little Pony.
Yes, but she doesn't have shoes on.
Right.
I think one of the girls says that they haven't eaten and they're hungry.
It's her as well, yeah.
Yeah, so these elements of what is life like when you have to just be immersed in trauma, or where you are in these moments of escape peril, persecution. And a lot of families can relate to this. A lot of communities can relate to this. This is what we see. So I just appreciated those like little sentiments and notes and those places there that have you kind of catch your breath, like, oh, I could see this really happening. Within the fantasy, of course, of spyhood and espionage and the Avengers being the backdrop of this film coming right after Civil War.
Yeah.
So, I appreciated this movie. I very much liked the bond between the sisters. I felt that it was so realistic and just very relatable. And I think this is better than most of the Marvel films we've covered so far.
Drea, why don't you tell the good folks at home where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and on Instagram and Twitter with the handle at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and at the Arkham Sessions. You can email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can come find us on Facebook, and you can come join us on Patreon, where we want to thank the following folks for having made this episode possible: Michael Pruitt, Weffy, Eric O'Sullivan, Zach Neal, Zachary Hunter, Mike Blanchard, Dr. Girlfriend, Maria Diego, Nick Gilbert, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, J. Griffin Hughes, our good friend Todd Stashwick, my father, Carl Ward, and a brand new patron, an old friend of ours, Antonio Lopez. We have talked about him on the show before. He also just gave us a year's subscription on Patreon, and it made me think, we're going to make everybody a deal for as long as supplies last. If you give us a 1-year subscription that totals $30 or more, we will go ahead and send you one of the last of our 2020 challenge coins with Batman on the coin, with the quote, "He's doing the best with what he's been given," around the edge. We will make that available to you. Normally it's the $30 tier, but if you go ahead and subscribe for a year, as long as you've spent $30,
and those are exclusive.
They are exclusive.
We will not be printing more 2020 coins.
We will not be making them available to the public any other way. We're not taking them to conventions with us. We're not doing anything like that. So
when they're gone, they're gone.
When they're gone, they're gone, and there aren't really a whole lot left. So get on it now. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.